G'day folks, and welcome to my final thoughts on Fields of Fire. This is the Volume 1, second edition, published by GMT Games in 2017. It's designed by Ben Hull. It is a solitaire system where you manage a rifle company throughout potentially 4 different campaigns. It's a Normandy 44 campaign, 2 Korean War campaigns, and a Vietnam War campaign. Each campaign consists of a series of missions. In each mission, you will set up a grid of terrain cards specific to the era. That will be your map over which you are fighting. During the mission, you control an infantry company, and you'll have an objective. It might be a patrol mission. You have to patrol through a certain area. It may be defensive. You have to set up a defensive position and defend against an enemy attack. Or it might be an attack mission, an offensive mission, where you have to go and seize key ground and clear the enemy out from certain areas. During the course of these missions, you will, in effect, command that infantry company. You will be heavily focused on issues of command, control, coordination, communication, intelligence. You will have to you'll be striving to keep the various command elements of your company HQ and staff and platoon headquarters and units in communication. You can get the job done more effectively if you keep those units in communication. So a key part of your thinking throughout gameplay is coordination and control. How can I keep, for example, the phone lines connected with headquarters? How can I keep my radios in communication with those other elements of command? That's one part of your thinking. Once you have command points for your various formations, you spend those command points on actions. So it's really about action point accumulation through effective command and control, and then action point expenditure to actually get things done with your units. And there are dozens of different actions available to you. So you've got a lot of sort of possibilities for things to do. They can be simple things like moving or infiltrating from one card to another. The basis of your activities are your units. You start off with a series of squads in platoons. They kind of lose steps, or they can detach sort of fire teams to go and do separate activities. They may take casualties and become a casualty or a litter team or paralyzed or fire teams or assault teams, so they're broken down to sort of smaller, weaker formations. You'll have a series of attachments as well. So you'll have sort of light machine gun attachments, anti-tank team attachments, heavy machine guns, mortars. You'll have artillery observers, all these type of things kind of attached to your platoons or to your company. So during your turn, you'll accumulate commands. You'll activate your platoons for activities. They will also accumulate commands, and your platoon HQ will spend these commands to order the units within their command to do certain things. Like I said, moving from one card to another, or looking for cover within a card, or trying to coordinate fire on a card, infiltrating to a card to avoid being exposed, various other things. There are dozens of these types of actions. Through careful communication, control, you are basically trying to achieve your mission. You're trying to, on an offensive mission, you're trying to move forward, you're trying to engage the enemy effectively. And once this is a solitaire system, you'll have potential contacts throughout the map, and they use these simple little potential contact markers. You'll draw a card for this, and may encounter various enemies throughout the map. Once you find the enemy, you use these actions and you use your units, various types of units, to direct the most effective fire you can against those enemy contacts. You may encounter an enemy squad, or an enemy fire team, or an enemy light machine gun. And so you'll try to basically eliminate those squads through effective fire. Heavier weapons are more effective. Coordinated fire is more effective. Crossfire is more effective. Targeting the enemy in terrain that provides less cover is more effective. So you're looking to employ tactics and weapons that enable you to bring most effective fire to attack the enemy. Ideally, you want to clear them off and keep moving. Clear those cards, clear the terrain, and move forward to achieve your mission. A large part of the implementation of these actions revolves around your action deck. Many actions are automatic. So if you want to move and you're in command, you simply move. It's an automatic action. It's all summarized in the sort of action summary. Often, you need to make a check to see if you succeed in doing things. So, for example, if you want to infiltrate onto an enemy card, you draw some cards, and you need to find, which I've luckily done, the infiltration icon. That means I succeed in that action. If I want to find cover on, let's say, an orchard, I look at the cover number, it says 3, I draw 3 cards, and I need to find the word cover. I've got lucky here. So I would place a cover marker on that card, and the unit looking for cover finds that cover, and they can hide under that cover. If I want to spot an enemy unit, I start with a basis of 2, and there are various modifiers to this. I look for basically a spotted icon. I'm unsuccessful here, so I don't spot that unit. I still spend the command point to perform that action. I've been looking for this enemy unit on this card. I know they're there somewhere. I just failed in that action. So a lot of action resolution happens in this sort of green box on the card. The cards also tell you how many command points you get if a unit is in command. If a unit is out of command, they can use a lower valued number for initiative. So basically, they're not being commanded by high HQ, they're using their own initiative, but they don't get as many actions to perform. During the combat phase, when you are resolving combat, you also use these cards for combat resolution. So you work out the volume of fire being poured into an area. You'll have these volume of fire markers, which will tell you a kind of numerical modifier to apply. You add up various forms of cover and other effects to get a modifier from -4 to +6. You'll then draw the top card of the event. Let's say I'm firing on this enemy unit and I've got a -2. I draw the top card, I look at -2, and it will tell me if I have a hit, a pin, or a miss. If I miss, nothing happens. If the unit was pinned, they're no longer pinned. If I get a pin result, the unit is pinned down, they're taking cover, it reduces the effectiveness of that enemy fire. Ideally, I want to hit the enemy. So if I score a hit, I draw another card, and I resolve the hit effect box. I check the quality of that enemy unit, whether they're veterans, line, or green, and I look at the letters shown here. These can be things like convert a step of that unit to a fire team, or convert a step of that unit to a litter team, or convert a step of that unit to a casualty. Sometimes there are multiple effects that happen for multiple steps of that unit. So I want to get the most effective damage on that unit. So this action deck is one deck of cards that plays a central role in your game. You're doing a lot throughout these cards. Whenever you need to make a random check, whenever you need a random number from a choice. So for example, let's say I made contact with the enemy. I look for, whenever I find these potential contacts and I'm making a check to see if there's an enemy there, I do a contact check, I draw cards, I look for the word contact. If I find the word contact, there's an enemy there. I then draw a card to determine what type of contact it is. Whenever you have a choice, as I said, you use this bottom row of cards. If it is a choice between, let's say, 6 different options, I look at the number 6 and I look at the number below that to get my random number out of 6. When there's enemy contacts, there's usually 10 different enemy contacts. I look at 10, and this card tells me that I pick the 10th number in that series of 10 to get that random contact. Once I've found that random contact, I'll draw again and look at the enemy placement table to determine where they go. Again, a choice of 10. This one tells me to use choice number 7, which will tell me to place the enemy in a particular area. It may be directly in front, at maximum line of sight, or on the card where I encountered them, or off to the left or off to the right, things like that. So this deck is the basis of much of the implementation of the rules throughout the game in terms of fire resolution, in terms of command activation, in terms of checks for random events, in terms of fire effects, And in terms of random number generation for various checks and resolutions throughout the game. So that's how the game works. That's the system. To recap, you build command points, you spend these command points to do actions. Various actions require checks using these decks. You look for the enemy, you try to find the enemy. Sometimes you don't want to find the enemy. Using these, the resolution system through these decks, you'll bring fire against these enemy. And sometimes you're making checks to bring fire to the enemy. You call for artillery. You need to check if your call for artillery is successful. You might make a check for concentrating fire, all these kind of things using this deck. Yeah, and you're fighting the enemy. You're trying to eliminate them. You're drawing on these various actions to perform that job. Your decision making really revolves around the combination of those things, using all these resources that are at hand, using your various types of units and their various things like their various effectiveness levels, the various weapons they carry, their step levels. So a 3-step squad has more steps, can take more casualties than a 1-step assault team. Their range of fire is important as well. So an assault team can only fire at close range on their terrain card. A heavier weapon like a heavy machine gun can fire at long range, so they can fire through, for example, some open fields onto an enemy beyond. There are line of sight rules in this game. They're not too difficult. Basically, each terrain card will either have sort of a white bordered edge or a green bordered edge on top there. White bordered edge means there's no cover there. It's clear terrain and you can see straight through that white bordered edge. So, for example, the open field here is completely white bordered edge. Open field, I can see straight through that open field to the card beyond. Something like the woods, in contrast, has a green bordered edge all the way around. It blocks line of sight, so I can see into that card, I can see out of that card, but it limits line of sight. When you engage the enemy, you will place what's called a primary direction of fire marker, and I mentioned this earlier, a volume of fire marker. This tells you the direction both friendly and or enemy units are shooting at. Once friendly units engage in fire, they will keep shooting along this primary direction of fire, exerting this volume of fire into their target area until you either order them to stop or they run out of ammunition. And this can be difficult because if you move, let's say your platoon HQ orders one of your squads to start shooting, and then the platoon HQ moves off, that squad will keep shooting at that target area. Even if the enemy has been eliminated, even if the enemy runs away, they'll keep shooting at this empty terrain because they haven't received orders to stop. They don't know what's going on. And so yeah, they'll keep shooting. The rules for volume fire are interesting. As I said, you are thinking about trying to get the heaviest weapons, the most effective weapons to fire at a target area, to get the most effective modifier to that combat resolution. But it's interesting. Basically, and it's probably one of the weaknesses I find with the game is that if you get a heavy machine gun firing, they bring their heavy weapons modifier, which is a -3 modifier. That's great. If I bring one squad to the combat, they bring small arms, let's say, which provides a +0 modifier. If I bring a dozen more squads to that combat, the modifier doesn't change. So the volume of that small arms fire, there's no multiplier for this. Certainly if I'm attacking from different angles, I can get what's called a crossfire modifier, -1. If I get those units to concentrate fire, I get an additional -1 modifier. But that's still not as effective as bringing one heavy weapons team to fire or one mortar team to fire. So it's really, or bringing, calling on fire support to bring, let's say, -4 or a -5 modifier for a big fire support mission to target that hex. So your squads aren't really effective at firing, and the quantity of fire is almost insignificant compared to the quality of that fire. One mortar forward observer calling a fire mission is immensely more effective than a dozen infantry squads firing into a hex. And again, that I guess you could argue that reflects the the impact, the history, and what you're simulating here. That an artillery strike is far more effective than a squad. The squads are there to seize the ground, occupy terrain, and so forth. Their small arms fire is ineffective. It's more the point that 10 small arms squads are still as ineffective as one small arms squad. There's no incremental fire. But the 10 squads firing the hex are exactly the same, have exactly the same impact as the one squad firing on the hex, on the card rather. So defending, you have a cover value for terrain shown up in the top right. This is another modifier to that fire value. Open fields, of course, there's no cover there, they provide 0. There are cover markers, as I said, that you can search for and hide beneath. Various gradients of cover. You've got the basic cover at +1. You may find in later campaigns light buildings, strong buildings. There are some special terrains like churches, which provide observation posts, which increase your line of sight. There are hills as well, which enhance mainly line of sight benefits. If you're up on terrain on a hill, you can see over intervening terrain. There are, of course, as I said earlier, communication is a key element. So you're carrying radios with you, and whilst you're performing all these actions, you are ever mindful of how you're moving your command elements, your company commander, your XO, first sergeant, so the company staff, platoon HQ, but also their subordinate units to be in command and communication and control. Because once they go out of control, as I've kind of touched on, you can no longer order many of these units. There is a phase where you make an initiative draw, and you'll be able to get general initiative, where any unit on the board can perform actions, but that's based on a random card draw. If this was the card I drew, I'm getting 0 general initiatives to use in that impulse. During that impulse, as I said, any unit anywhere can order any action on their own initiative. They don't have to be in command. You basically ignore command just for that one brief impulse, but there aren't many actions being performed in that general initiative impulse. So that's a fundamental element of the game. You are building command, spending these actions. What complicates all this is several things. The rulebook is a mess. And I'm going to say bluntly that this game is barely playable out of the box. If you were to give this someone a game and send them off to a cabin in the woods with no communication, I don't think there's a lot of things that aren't addressed by the rulebook. I mentioned the church, and that the church has an OP symbol on it, for example. And the OP symbol is not explained anywhere else. It's an observation post, but what does that mean? Well, the rules for the church are summarised in the book, but not what that symbol means. So the symbol is basically a reminder of the special rules for the church, but that's not covered anywhere. And there are various other elements like that simply aren't covered. The rulebook is divided into sections, which is great, but many of these sections are quite big. The rules, I found, are all over the place. So if I'm trying to find information on primary direction of fire, there's certainly a brief section on primary direction of fire, but it may not have the information I want. Things like using a heavy machine gun. So when a heavy machine gun moves and becomes exposed, it's a tripod-mounted weapon. So they need time to set up, and they can't fire while exposed. And that's buried somewhere in the rulebook. Things like what happens when you move into a primary direction of fire area, and are you subject to fire? They're also buried in just unusual sections of the rulebook. Questions around what the enemy does in certain circumstances. There is, because it's a sort of an AI system, you use an enemy activity check hierarchy series of tables. You check the nature of the mission, whether the enemy's on the defensive or offensive, whether it's a limited action or pinned enemy formation, and what type of tactics that enemy is employing. So for example, if it's a defensive mission and the enemy is using hasty defensive tactics, you'll use this column, you'll make a random card draw to make a choice out of, let's say, 3 or 5, and that will drive what action the enemy does. They may continue firing, but for example, the action may be to search for cover or to make a grenade attack whilst maintaining their primary direction of fire. And yeah, there's many unanswered questions. And so out of the box, it's a very difficult game to understand. Reading the rulebook, 64 pages, a very difficult game to grasp. Thankfully, there is a wonderful community of gamers supporting this. It's a very, despite the problems, this is a very highly rated game on Board Game Geek. A lot of people absolutely love this game. It is a very well-designed solitaire game. I want to acknowledge that as well. You've got a lot of decision making here, but were it not for those gamers, as I mentioned in some of my earlier videos, for YouTubers like Blue Tweezers, Dave's Gaming Cave, The Player's Aid, and Mike from Counterattack, were it not for those types of videos, this game would be very, very difficult to play correctly. And I've watched other videos, and a lot of people played incorrectly. And if you're playing solitaire, a lot of people role play the game, and they just sort of roll with their understanding of the rules. You're playing by yourself, so you're not hurting an opponent. And I think a lot of people just do that. They accept that the rules aren't great. They make their own interpretations. But to play it correctly, as I said, we need that community. The forums on Board Game Geek, for example, are very active with fans of the game, helping people out. I've posted a few times, and I'm getting a response very quickly to my queries. But yeah, there is a huge learning kind of curve, and it's in just understanding the rules as written. Other games kind of have, games like the Battalion Combat series have big learning curves, but the rules are very well written, easy to understand, and you'll focus on learning how to play the game. This one, once you understand the rules, it's relatively easy to play the game, but it's understanding how to play the game, which is a difficult process here. I understand, I've been advised recently that there is another rules rewrite in process, or in progress rather. Fingers crossed that cleans things up. In the interim, if you are looking at learning this game, I would highly recommend those videos that I mentioned. Blue Tweezers, Counterattack, Dave's Gaming Cave, and The Player's Aid. They are wonderful videos just to watch through how people are doing things. So, look, another element of this game is, I mentioned communication, keeping in line of sight, keeping within range of your command. There are also pyrotechnics that you can employ, things like smoke, and these provide basically visual symbols. So any unit that has in command of the unit using this smoke, you basically pre-program the colors of this smoke and the types of this smoke. So for example, I pre-programmed my red star cluster pyrotechnic such that when my company HQ fires this, all units in line of sight cease fire. All units, all platoons. I've programmed my green smoke such that for my third platoon, so that when units of my third platoon see this green smoke, they have line of sight to it, they shift their fire to a different target. I have other programmed pyrotechnics such that if I let my yellow smoke off, I believe the instructions here are for units within line of sight of second platoon. So units of second platoon with line of sight to the yellow smoke will advance towards, I think, the secondary objective. And I have similar smoke there. Smoke can also obscure line of sight, so if you're under heavy fire, you can pop a smoke to block line of sight, and yeah, various other effects. There are various friendly higher HQ events and enemy events, and they kind of create a bit of chaos to the mix. They can do things like have ammunition supply, command failures. I had a recent visit from my regimental brigade commander, which created a lot of rules confusion because I don't know really what he did. He came to pop by in the middle of a firefight for 2 turns. Yeah, various things like that. The enemies can launch counterattacks, barrage strikes, all these kind of things. At the end of the day, as I said, so bringing this all together, you are making decisions about command. You're making careful decisions to keep your units in command, and that is absolutely paramount. Or a lot of your movement decisions, a lot of the tactics you employ are designed to facilitate that communication and control, to keep your platoon HQs, to keep your units in or close to your platoon HQs, and then to keep those platoon HQs within line of sight and in communication with radio communication or phone communication with your company HQ. That is important because that gives them the actions that they need to do their job. Beyond that, the implementation of actions, and this is where I want to get to the core of some of my concerns with this game. The implementation of your actions often come down to these random card draws. So if I'm trying to infiltrate, I'm successful. If I'm trying to spot an enemy, I'm unsuccessful. If I'm trying to call an artillery barrage, I'm unsuccessful. If I want to launch a grenade attack, I'm unsuccessful. If I want general initiative, I get 1. If I'm drawing a random enemy event and they counterattack, a lot of the implementation, okay, combat, more importantly, combat. I'm resolving combat on these enemy units that have been blocking this card. I miss. All these things come down to random card draws. Obviously, you're trying to employ the best tactics. But I had a situation in the last mission that I played where I had brought 3 fire missions in a row. 3 heavy fire missions, high explosive, -4, -5 modifier fire missions. I achieved pretty much the maximum. 3 turns in a row, I achieved the maximum effectiveness. The best you can get is -4 modifier. I was unlucky to get a pin result on one of them. On the 2 others, I hit, great. But whenever I'm resolving the fire effects, I just wasn't doing a lot of damage. I was creating fire teams, or I was creating lither teams, and I wasn't converting these hits into casualties. This really brought to the fore my concerns with the game, is that everything I did, I can employ really great tactics, I can bring the heaviest firepower 3 turns in a row, and I was spending a lot of actions to call in this off-map support. I'm bringing in 105mm field artillery. I'm bringing in my regimental cannon company to bring heavy fire. I've also got crossfire, and yeah, bring a lot of fire. And pretty much the best I can do with this -4 modifier. But if the random card draw is just aren't working for me, nothing's happening. I still have enemy units, several turns of fire into this area, and I still have enemy units there, pinned, but still 2 steps remaining from a 3-step squad that moved there. And that really raised these frustrations, that so much of what you do comes down to a random card draw that, yeah, I'm not saying I'm employing the best tactics. There's probably something else I could have done there. But even employing the best tactics, even getting the best firepower, making the optimal decisions, you're coming down to random card draws. And it's that random, chaotic element. After all this, I'll also point out, after all this and after navigating my way and coming around these enemies and directing effective fire and making what I think, as a relatively inexperienced player of Fields of Fire, making what I think are some pretty good decisions. After making all these good decisions and reaching my objectives, on one of the final turns, I drew an enemy hire event, and it was a counterattack, which brought enemy infiltration throughout. They reoccupied these objectives and completely demoralized me. Because I've been doing all this work, I've been working really hard, making these careful decisions, planning really carefully about what to do and where to bring my effective weapons and all this kind of thing, managing command, I think, really effectively, and then just a random event completely throws those plans up in the air. And it's that randomness, that chaos, that uncertainty that I didn't like. But a lot of people love that. And that's where I think you might like this game. There's a narrative that develops, and if you dive into this story, and you know this German squad in the hedgerow have really bunkered down. They're undercover. They've taken hits, but they keep holding out. They're not firing outside. They're reduced to 2 teams here, and they're not firing outside that card. They're just really keeping their heads down low and hiding, and that's why they're surviving. You can tell yourself that story. And perhaps they're radioing for help, and I'm advancing to the objectives, and just as I get to the objectives, the Germans have been waiting, and then they pounce, and they emerge from all over the place, and they launch their counterattack. You can tell yourself that story, and a lot of people will love that, that narrative-driven sort of gameplay. With the random chaotic events, you know, the counterattack that has completely undermined all my activity throughout the whole mission. A lot of people I appreciate will love that, and there is a lot of control. As I said, you're making a lot of decisions, you're spending a lot of action points, you're doing a lot of things with your squads and platoons and teams. For me, the balance between kind of choice and chaos was just a bit too much on the chaotic side. I didn't like that. I felt like whilst I'm doing a lot and making a lot of decisions, and whilst there are dozens of different types of actions to choose from, and I can call on these fire missions, I felt that the resolution of these things that I have control over was largely out of my control. This felt a little different to using, for example, a CRT, where you can really bring, if you want 6 to 1 odds, you can bring 6 to 1 odds to a combat. Here, I'm bringing my heavy firepower, and it's just, yeah, not having the effect that I would like to see. A lot of people comment on sort of the abstract nature of the terrain cards. Initially, yeah, it looks like an abstract game, but I think pretty soon you kind of immerse yourself in this environment and you get a sense of what you're looking at, and it becomes very interesting to move through this terrain. Yeah, it becomes quite an immersive experience. You do immerse yourself in that narrative. Just as I said, fair warning that it is a chaotic narrative, and you lose control over kind of what's happening. Yeah, various times throughout the game. So, folks, there you go. That's Fields of Fire. Hopefully, I've given you some sense of what it is like to play through. It is it is a huge learning curve. So, first thing you encounter is the learning curve, how difficult it is to play this game. And as I said, it's one of the most difficult games to learn how to play. Once you learn how to play it, I think the tactics that you employ are kind of moderate complexity. It's often pretty easy to figure out what you should be doing. It's often difficult to understand sort of things that arise through enemy activity, and you often sort of have to duck away and check forums and so forth. But as I said, it provides a good narrative of these missions, and as I said, that's I think why you may really like that. The depth of the narrative too. These missions are quite long. A 10-turn mission runs for about 4 to 5 hours. Okay, so each mission is 4 to 5 hours long. It's solitaire, so again, it's a kind of game that you can leave set up and walk away and then come back, as I've been doing for the missions I've been playing. There is, yeah, enough variability so that every time you set up, I can replay these missions all over again, and there'll be different terrain cards, and I can set up different sort of command structures and different pyrotechnic instructions, and I'll encounter different enemies. The very first mission I played, I found 2 light machine guns, an 88, 2 snipers, and a mortar barrage, no enemy squads. And the second mission I played, I encountered 4 enemy squads, a couple of light machine guns, yeah, a lot more enemy squads basically, and more tactics that they're employing. So every time you play this game, it's going to be a very different experience. So there's a lot of variability in here. There is certainly a huge amount of gameplay in Fields of Fire. So if you're looking for sort of depth of experience and you want something that you could really play for a long time, this is it. You can really sink your teeth into these large campaigns. And there are, I'd argue, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of gameplay here. So certainly very deep, solitaire, dedicated game. As Blue Tweezers has done. I think, I haven't played this with friends, but I think it would work really well as a sort of a team-based game that you could play with friends. You could give someone different commands, partition their platoons off, and give each of your friends a command of a different platoon, and that would be a really cool experience, as Blue has done. And demonstrated how effective that is. So the game, while solitaire, yeah, could really facilitate team play. It's a relatively easy game, I think, to teach if you want to teach friends how to play this. If you are familiar with the rules, you could kind of give them the basics of the gameplay and help them out as they move along. Yeah, there are a massive counters. There are hundreds of unit types, and that can be really chaotic. They're double-sided, and there's kind of you'll be looking for a fire team or assault team, and they'll be on the back of various types of units. So that can be a difficult thing. There are, as I said, different terrain decks for the different campaigns that you encounter, which feature kind of historically linked types of campaign. You're more likely to encounter sort of a small village in Korea and Vietnam compared to Normandy, for example. Lots of bocage in Normandy. Various weather effects, lighting effects as well, which affect visibility. You'll have what else? You'll have various sort of scenario effects, which change sort of the tactical posture of the enemy, the nature of their activities. You may encounter a very aggressive enemy, so when they counterattack, they become very aggressive, and suddenly they're attacking you. They're trying to recapture those objectives. So yeah, a lot of different things going on, a lot of different experiences. It can be, as I said, very rewarding in the sense of that narrative that develops, a story that develops through your playthrough. There's a lot more I could say about this. I could 64 pages. I'm skimming the rules here. Hope that's given you kind of an overview of what this is like, and give you a sense of what it's like to play and the type of decisions that you're making. To reiterate, there is certainly a game here for a lot of people, and again, it is very, very highly rated on Board Game Geek. I don't want to dissuade you if you think there's potential here for you to really like this game. That is Fields of Fire, Ben Hull and GMT Games. Check it out if it's of interest, and thanks everyone for watching.